Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this because today we're unpacking a fundamental mystery that is literally sitting right under our noses. I mean, we all know what it means to be alive, right? Well, maybe not. Today we're going on a fascinating journey to dissect the foundational and frankly, surprisingly complex definitions of the living world. We're going to strip away all our daily assumptions, look at the raw biological data, and see what truly separates the living from the non-living.
So, what makes a human different from a mountain? It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? Like a setup to a bad punchline. But really think about it. Your immediate reaction might be, well, obviously humans grow and mountains don't. But as we're going to see in just a minute, that assumption is actually biologically incorrect. We are completely challenging those basic middle school assumptions about what it means to be alive today. And honestly, the answers might just blow your mind.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, defining the living world. Then the absolute rules of life, followed by the illusions of life, consciousness and awareness, and finally, the magic of emergence.
All right, let's get into section 1, defining the living world. Biology is the science of life forms and life processes, and the living world is just incredibly diverse. We're talking millions of species, including these wild extremophiles that literally thrive in the absolute harshest conditions on Earth. So, across all this incredible diversity, how do we actually draw a line for what is alive? Well, for this explainer, we're using a super strict pass/fail scientific standard called a defining property. To pass this test, a trait must be present in exactly 100% of living organisms without exception, and in exactly 0% of non-living things. Let's see what actually passes this test. Moving right along to section 2, the absolute rules of life. Let's look at the winners. First up, we've got cellular structure. Every single living organism out there is made up of cells. A cell is the absolute smallest structural and functional unit that's capable of independent life processes. Because every living thing has it and no non-living thing does, cellular structure is an absolute, undeniable defining property. But there's always a catch, right? Interestingly, viruses entirely lack a cellular structure, no cells at all. And this is exactly why viruses exist in such a bizarre, controversial gray area in biology.
Okay, our second absolute rule is metabolism. Metabolism is basically the sum total of all the chemical reactions occurring inside an organism's body. And it's divided into two totally contrasting halves. On one side, we have catabolism, which is the breakdown of molecules. This is an exothermic process, which just means it releases energy. Then, on the flip side, is anabolism. This is the synthesis, or the building up of molecules, which is endothermic and actually uses energy. So whether an organism is breaking down food to release some energy or building muscle to store it, every single activity is ultimately driven by these metabolic reactions. Because this happens in all living things, no exceptions, metabolism easily passes our strict test. It is a true defining property of life.
But of course, science is never without its weird little quirks. We can actually extract these metabolic reactions and perform them completely outside the body in cell-free systems, which you've probably heard called in vitro. Now, these isolated reactions are identical to what happens inside us. Yet, sitting there in a glass tube, they exist in a strange scientific limbo. The reactions themselves are neither living nor non-living. They are living reactions, sure, but they are not a living thing. Kind of wild to think about. That brings us to section 3, the illusions of life. Remember my question about the mountain earlier? Well, biologically speaking, growth is defined as an irreversible increase in mass or an increase in number. So if a simple increase in mass is growth, then non-living things like mountains, sand mounds, and boulders absolutely grow. They do it through a process called accretion, which is basically just the accumulation of matter on their surface. Because non-living things can technically grow in this way, growth immediately fails our 100% test. It is actually not a defining property of living beings. Crazy, right? That being said, living things definitely do grow, but they do it from the inside, through cell division. Not by just piling stuff on the outside, like accretion. And even then, it's handled completely differently across different kingdoms. Plants, for example, exhibit continuous growth throughout their entire life, thanks to these specialized meristematic tissues. Animals, on the other hand, have their growth capped at a certain age. After we hit that cap, our cells primarily just divide to replace worn-out or lost tissues. Oh, and one undeniable, rock-solid fact. Dead organisms don't grow at all. Next up in our illusions of life is reproduction. Biological reproduction is just how progenies are produced. Now, while sexual reproduction involves gametes, asexual reproduction is vastly, wildly diverse. Just look at this breakdown. Fungi use asexual spores.
Yeast and hydra, they use budding. Planaria, which are these little flatworms, undergo true regeneration. And then fungi, algae, and mosses can use fragmentation. It is just an incredibly diverse characteristic of the living world.
But here is the massive, mind-bending paradox. Reproduction is absolutely not a defining property of life. Wait, why? Because remember, to be a defining property, it has to be true for 100% of living organisms. Zero exceptions. Yet, there are undeniably living organisms that just do not reproduce. Mules are a fantastic example of this. Worker honeybees are another one. Even infertile human couples who cannot reproduce due to biological abnormalities, they are clearly, undoubtedly alive. Because there are exceptions, reproduction fails the test.
All right, Section 4, Consciousness and Awareness.
Okay, so every single living thing has the ability to sense changes in its environment. They respond to external stimuli, which broadly fall into three categories. You've got physical stimuli, like light. For example, photoperiods, which is just the duration of daily light exposure, deeply influence the reproduction of seasonal breeders and even the flowering of plants. Then there are chemical stimuli, like acids and bases. And finally, biological stimuli, like the presence of other organisms.
This fundamental ability to sense and respond is exactly what biologists define as consciousness. It is simply the organism's awareness of its surroundings. From the absolute smallest bacteria recoiling from a toxic chemical to a sunflower actively turning towards the sun, consciousness is present in 100% of living things, no exceptions, making it a true defining property. Now note that this is very different from self-consciousness, the complex awareness of oneself, which is a trait that is strictly unique to humans.
To really solidify how deep and incredibly specific this biological definition goes, consider this thought-provoking edge case. Human patients lying in a coma who are considered brain dead have completely lost their human self-consciousness. Yet, their cells still metabolize, they still maintain cellular structure, and biologically speaking, they are still living. The sheer, raw biological mechanics of life persist even when that higher-level human awareness completely fades.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the magic of emergence. Let's see how all of this builds together step by step. All living phenomena are essentially due to underlying interactions. You start with small biomolecules, the basic building blocks. They interact to form complex organelles. Those organelles then interact to form a functional cell, our basic unit of life. And then, those individual cells interact to form highly specialized tissues.
This right here is the beautiful foundational concept of emergence. The interactions at a lower level always give rise to emerging advanced properties at a higher level. A tissue can do things a single cell simply cannot. A cell can do things an organelle cannot. Life isn't just a basic list of ingredients, it is the breathtaking result of how those ingredients communicate and combine. The resulting life form is infinitely greater than the simple sum of its chemical parts.
Which leaves us with the ultimate definition of life. Living organisms are self-replicating, evolving, and self-regulating interactive systems that are capable of responding to external stimuli. But as we look at this incredible ladder of emergence, from molecules to cells to tissues to entirely self-regulating human beings, I want to leave you with this final thought. If lower-level interactions always give rise to advanced, higher-level properties, as billions of human beings interact across the globe today, what incredible emergent property is waiting to come next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you next time.